Well, you brought up Syria, and of course that's another issue on which many people have criticized President Obama. Critics say that if the United States had engaged earlier and provided lethal support to the rebels, or even greater leadership to U.S. allies like Turkey and other Gulf states that are supporting the rebels, that things would be different today. Do you think had the United States acted like this earlier, perhaps a year or so ago, when former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and other members of the cabinet suggested that the United States get involved with lethal assistance? Or do you think that the jihadis who are infiltrating the opposition would have infiltrated anyway?
Well, the jihadis would have infiltrated anyway, but ultimately, exactly because the jihadis are going to infiltrate, it would be beneficial to us to set up a non-jihadi faction in Syria that's capable of fighting jihadis, unless we intend to go fight ourselves. So, the sooner we did this, the better it would have been. There would have been a American-backed militia with American arms, American training, with American relationships, that then, could have been a fact on the ground against the jihadis. So right now, you have a situation where the Syrian state is collapsing and there is no counterweight to the jihadis, so they're taking over. I think American leadership would have mattered, and it need not only have been in the military arena. I think leadership on addressing the humanitarian issue. I think leadership on the diplomatic front would have mattered. I think we could have made the Syrian opposition a more serious force than it is. We could have coordinated better around regional leaders. We could have been in much more serious conversations with Russia and China than ones that we have had. And I think generally the symbolism of our disengagement has caused the situation to become much more chaotic. I mean, the very sign of American seriousness would mean that everybody would calculate the situation differently. And, ultimately, Syria is in a situation that is getting worse and worse, getting to a point where we can no longer ignore it. But by the time we begin paying attention to it, the cost of addressing it is also going to be much higher.
What's your view of the so-called International Peace Conference that would be brokered by the United States and Russia on Syria? Do you have any hopes for a negotiated settlement at this point?
I think a negotiated settlement is going to be difficult to get to, and it's not going to happen in one or two meetings. The question is, you go into Geneva meeting, the next meeting, with the hope of creating an ongoing process that can get you maybe to a ceasefire and then show a path going forward. But I don't think the Russians or the Syrians or the Iranians are going to take the peace conference seriously unless you also change the facts on the ground on them. And that's not going to happen unless the rebels become a more serious fighting force. If Assad really calculates that he could lose the war and it's better for him to negotiate now. And I think we've started with the diplomacy without backing diplomacy with force. And that will make it, I think, more difficult.